Hey, I'm ZSH Plays. Welcome to Building Jurassic Park. In this video, we're going to build a complete movie-accurate Jurassic Park, including everything that you see in the film and all the future attractions that are mentioned as well. We've got a lot to get through, so let's go. I am so excited to start building this. We recreated Jurassic Park as best we could in Jurassic World Evolution 2, but now we can really go to town on it, and we're going to start with the arrival point. What we're going to do is edit this arrival point so that we can get the famous scene of the helicopter landing on the little landing pad right next to the water. So we're going to detach the landing pad from the arrival point, and then we'll grab all of these markings here and move them over to where the actual pad is going to go. And then we'll build up some fences around it and put some emergency lights in and get this looking exactly as it does in the film. And then we're going to get rid of the rest of the arrival point and start building around this pad until we've recreated the scene from the film exactly. I want this arrival point to actually function. That way the helicopter will regularly take off and land. So what we're going to do is delete everything except for the helipad and the box that the arrival point needs to work, and then we'll just hide that under some foliage. And now we're going to do some terrain work and turn this into the actual helicopter landing point. So I've removed the arrival point for the moment. We've removed a load of water to get the helipad closer to the waterfall, and we'll fill the edge in with rocks, just experimenting here. I did try to just put down this helipad on its own, but if you do that, then you don't get the actual helicopter taking off. It does need to be part of the arrival point, so we'll get that sorted in a minute. We'll completely surround the helipad with various different types of rocks, and then we'll move on and get the arrival point actually working. We'll use the custom arrival point. This is the little box that the arrival point needs to function. So we're going to place this down here where we can get a path going out of it, and then later on we'll just cover that up completely. There we go, we've got our helicopter back, we've got our markings back, and now we're going to use a classic Planet Zoo trick here, bury trees into the ground so they look like just mounds of vegetation. As always in JWE, the arrival point and all the buildings need to be connected to paths, but now that we've got invisible paths, that is much less of a problem. We're going to start now building the fence with the gate in it that the jeeps drive through once Grant, etc. get off the helicopter. And then we'll place in the classic gate, which already matches the one in the film. And then we'll put some more foliage in, and then we're going to finish this off with some stairs going up to the helicopter pad, and then the kind of ruined buildings in between the helipad and the water. And while we finish that off, let's talk about the plans for the park. So the park is effectively going to be split into two. On the right-hand side of this map, we're going to have the Jeep tour, as well as featuring everything in the film: Dilophosaurus, Tyrannosaurus, Gallimimus, Brachiosaurus, Parasaurolophus, and Triceratops. We're also going to have Baryonyx and Herrerasaurus, which are glimpsed briefly in plans in the film. And then on the left-hand side of the park, we're going to have the Visitors Compound, the Jungle River Ride, Proceratosaurus, Metriacanthosaurus, the Aviary, and the Pteratops Hotel. Finally, we'll have free-roaming Compsognathus, which, along with the Pteranodons in the Aviary, means that every dinosaur seen in the film, whether they're actually seen or it's just on a embryo or a park map, will be in, with the exception of Stegosaurus, because that's not in the game. That is the helipad done. Let's take a look at it. It is so much fun being able to place things exactly where you want them in this game. This park is going to be super accurate. Here on the other side of the park is where we're going to build the Visitors Compound, so let's get started with that. First thing we're going to do is reduce the size of this lake here so we can start filling it in. We'll begin with the visitor center. It's one of the best pieces in the game, I think, but it is not movie accurate. In the film, of course, it's not quite yet open, so for the game they've kind of finished it with some plants and benches and things like that. So we're going to get rid of all the stuff that was added that you don't see in the film, and then put back in the scaffolding that you do see in the film. I want to do this so we can get a completely movie-accurate look for it. If you're enjoying this, by the way, please hit the like button. And if you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe, because there's a lot more Jurassic World Evolution 3 coming. Onto the Jeep tour. So we know that the Jeeps come from a garage located somewhere behind the visitor center. And then, of course, they go past the visitor center and then off out into the park. So we're going to lay the Jeep tour down exactly past the visitor center here. And then we'll start putting in a proper concrete road for it. So the Jeep tour does have a concrete road option, but it's kind of the wrong color concrete and you can't recolor it. I want the concrete to match the concrete that you see in front of the visitor center. So we're going to build our own in along the track just in front of the visitor center, and then it turns into a kind of dirt track after that. So we'll use these pieces here, get a decent line of it built, and then we can modify the group and spin this round so it exactly follows the line of the Jeep tour. We'll keep that track in the center of the concrete at all times. Takes a bit of time, but it's going to look much better like this than if we just use the default option. This kind of thing is what I love most about Jurassic World Evolution 3. No more compromises, no more, well, that'll have to do because we don't have any other kind of controls that will allow us to change it. We can get everything exactly how we want it. So we're going to put the lake in now that sits in front of the visitor center, use shallow water, and then we'll use the new deep water in the middle of it. And then we'll use the foliage options to get some of the lily pads in that you see in the film. Some of the environment brushes will actually give you different plants and rocks depending on whether you're in shallow water or deep water, so worth experimenting. And then we'll start placing individual trees exactly where they are in the film. And this is starting to look good now. Just want to do a final pass of trees and foliage to get this as close to the film as possible. We can't get as close to the back of the building as I'd like with the foliage brush, so we'll just individually place loads of palm trees and things like that in here. And then I noticed when I was rewatching the film that there's a massive tree that kind of extends over the turret on the right. So we'll use a scaled up kapok tree for that. And then we can move on to the emergency bunker. We know the layout of this part of the visitor compound from the sequence at the end of the film. You've got the emergency bunker, then the Raptor Pen, then a patch of forest, and then finally the maintenance shed. So we'll start with the emergency bunker. This is pretty much already done for us. All we're going to do is add in all the foliage that's growing out of these panels here. And then there's a step that you see Muldoon and Ellie stand on as well. So we need to add that in, line that up precisely with the bottom of these panels here, recolor it, and there we go. A movie-accurate emergency bunker, and it's time to move on to the Raptor Pen. We'll start by preparing the area for the pen to go into, so we're going to use various different sand brushes to get a realistic patch of sand here like you see in the film, and then flatten the terrain down as well. There we go, and then we can put the Raptor Pen in. This was the first thing I ever built in this game back in early access. Unfortunately, I don't have any footage of me building it because I didn't know what pieces we had and what was possible in the game at that point, so it took a long time to build. I didn't record any footage of me doing it, but what we're going to do today is actually get some raptors in here. We're going to do that using the invisible fences, so we'll get some invisible fences in roughly a rectangle that encompasses all of this, and then we're going to delete it. That enables us to get a raptor right in the middle just there. And then we can just undo. Love having an undo function now. And the game will still put the raptor in. And now we have an actual Velociraptor in the Raptor Pen. And the plants in here actually move along with her. How cool does that look? We'll cover up those not so invisible fences in a minute. But I want to get on to the maintenance shed now. So we're going to build a clearing in the forest and use this amazing fallen coconut palm to create the logs that Ellie has to jump over as she runs through here. We'll get some low vegetation through here as well. And then we'll come back and put some raptor transport cages over the visible parts of the invisible fence. Now we'll put a forklift in as well, like you see at the start of the film, and we'll just recolor this to make it a bit more themed. I think grey and red will work nicely. And then we can move on to actually building the maintenance shed. I say building, we have the maintenance shed in the game already, but what we're going to build is the area around it and get that as close to the film as we can. So lots of foliage here, looks really overgrown in the film. And then we'll build the fence and the gate that keeps the area not very secure. This fence matches the one in the film pretty nicely. We're just going to recolor it to get it more accurate. And then we can copy that across here. We'll have it disappearing off into the woods on either side of the little path that goes through it. And then we're going to add a gate in. We'll use the position snap option so that the gate automatically lines up with the end of the fence there. Place it down. We'll have it open, and then we'll just sort the terrain out so everything is nice and flat. And let's take a look at it. Looking very lush, and if you listen carefully you can actually hear the raptors. Next up, we're going to surround the whole visitor compound with a security fence as described in the film. We'll just add in a couple of the Jurassic Park style lights, and that is our visitor compound done. I remember recreating this in Jurassic World Evolution 2 and it looks so much better in this game with the scaffolding and the layout correct. Love that. Let's move on to the park gates and the beginning of the Jeep tour. The park gates are going to go in this part of the map here where it thins. It's really annoying that the Isla Nublar 93 map still has such a small buildable area in it, but we're going to make it work. We're going to make a nice smooth gradient going up to the top here, and then we'll put the actual park gates in, get these lined up, and then we'll have a tour road wind its way up here, lots of curves, keep it interesting. This will go through the forest, probably a lot longer than it would have been in the film. It's always hard to tell the geography of the park when you're watching the film. mainly because they never actually bothered designing a park in the first place. They just built the little bits that they needed for the story. And now we're into the park proper. The Jeep tour track will just be a dirt track. We don't need to put any concrete down. I want the tour track to really feel like it's in the middle of the jungle, so we'll get the foliage as close as we can to the track, and then we're going to use individual plants to fill in along the sides. It's looking okay at the moment, but we can get it a lot more overgrown and jungly than that. So we'll start placing individual plants down the sides of the most important parts of the track. I'm copying almost exactly the layout of the plants that you see in this scene in the film, or the various scenes as they're going through the gates. And then we're going to use the Planet Zoo trick again and start sinking down date palms to get loads of kind of fern style foliage going down the side of the track, and these really start to sell the jungle feel. We'll use the Z key to rotate each one before it's placed down so they don't all look the same, and we'll vary the height of each one as well. Finally, we're going to sink this tree way down and use this as kind of bushes and shrubs all the way down the side of the track to really start hemming it in so you really feel like it's been cut through the jungle. And there we go, that's looking good now. Let's get the fence in. Now we could just attach a fence directly to the gate, but like I said before, that's going to remove loads of our beautiful foliage here. So we're going to make one manually. We're going to use this wire piece, scale that up, and then start creating a fence just with this. So once we've got one in at the top and got the angle correct, we end up with a beautiful fence that looks like what you see on screen. And then we can just copy this across both sides of the gates. And there we go, the gates are done. Let's take a look at it. Just for fun, I've exactly recreated the scenes where they enter the park in the film. Try to get each shot as accurate as possible, which was a lot of fun. It's amazing how close we can get this to the film now with all the individually placed foliage and custom fences. It's a shame we don't have Jeff Goldblum peering out of the sunroof, but nothing I can do about that. The Jeeps are in the park, and next we're going to be building the Dilophosaurus Habitat. The first dinosaur you see on the tour in Jurassic Park is the Dilophosaurus. Watching the film, the first thing I noticed just as they start to get to the habitat is they drive past this low concrete wall. So we're going to build one of those. Really simple, we're just going to use this one piece here. Make sure it's lined up nicely with the track next to it. We can check that easier if we move it over towards the track. And then once we've got a nice curve made, we can just turn that into a group and then duplicate that around the rest of the curve. And then that's the concrete wall done. In terms of the dinosaurs on this tour and the routes that the tour takes, we're going to follow the routes established in the film and then add in the other dinosaurs as well, starting with our Dilophosaurus. We've built the little concrete wall that runs alongside the road as they enter this part of the park. And now we're going to build the little area with the sign that you see the cars go past as they hit the habitat. I find it's best to use the foliage brush to get as much foliage in as possible and then add custom plants yourself. We're going to put all the plants in around this sign here, get it nice and close to the track, and then we'll put the fence in for the Dilophosaur habitat. Now, how big was the Dilophosaurus habitat? As far as I'm aware, we don't know. But watching the film, it takes exactly 40 seconds for the vehicles to drive past the habitat. So I've set up a little test to see how far the Ford Explorers, not Jeeps, can drive in 40 seconds. There we go. And then we will make the habitat exactly that long. What we're doing here is adding the flashing warning lights to the Dilophosaur fence. There's the orange lights that you see flashing in the film. This one looks really nice, but it doesn't flash. This one, however, does. That is exactly what we need, so we will use that one. And then we will add these to every other fence post. One thing I would really like to see in Jurassic World Evolution 3 is a feature that is in Planet Coaster 2. Which is that if you're adding items to a ride, or in this case, a habitat or a fence, anything where you're going to have lots of the same thing, like posts on a fence, you can just add the items you want to one thing and then get the game to automatically add it to all the others for you. That would be so useful when you're trying to get habitats exactly the way that you want them. Next up, foliage and terrain. So we're going to use the foliage paint first of all to get some lower vegetation down the side of the fence, and then we're going to raise the terrain very slightly inside the habitat a bit back from the road, which matches what you see in the film and gives better visibility for the dinosaurs. Once we've got all of the terrain sorted, we'll go in with some custom planting. This is one of the best plants that's been brought over from Planet Zoo, I think, the Scavola bush. Especially if you scale it up, it is perfect for ground cover. You can just use these bushes to fill in huge spaces in the habitat. It always looks good and gives you that kind of tropical, jungly feel. We're mixing the tropical wood cover and the East Asian forest wood here. I think that's the best combo to get the look of the Jurassic Park film and the actual foliage you see on Hawaii. We'll fill the habitat with that. It's really full in terms of foliage in the film. And then we're going to do some more custom foliage on the opposite side of the track to get everything atmospheric. We'll add an end cap to that concrete wall, add some food for the Dilophosaurs, replace all the foliage that placing the feeders removes, add some water. Let's check out the habitat. It is so atmospheric when you drive in here. I absolutely love this. Even with the pretty much non-existent modular building that we've done in this habitat, it feels so much better than it did in Jurassic World Evolution 2. Everything just looks really good. We will need to do a lot more building for the T-Rex. There's just one thing missing, the Dilophosaurs, and that's because they're nocturnal. I bred them that way to match how they acted in the film. This one's awake though, so we'll take a look at her. They almost looked cute when they were asleep, but they certainly don't when they're awake, stalking through the forest here. Right, that's the Dilophosaurus habitat. Let's move on to the Tyrannosaur. One of my favorite things about the T-Rex paddock, apart from the T-Rex itself, is the fact that it's got huge mountains and hills behind it, kind of reefed in fog and covered in trees. It looks amazing. We got various kind of viewpoints like that on this map, but unfortunately they're all at the other side of the map. I found the kind of perfect spot for the T-Rex habitat, but if we put it there, it's going to take about half an hour to get there once you've gone past the Dilophosaurus. So what we're going to do is build our own big hill and cover that with trees. This was a lot of fun. I love the terrain tools in this game. You can create hills, valleys, canyons really easily, and if you're careful with the tools, you can make them look really realistic as well. We've raised the terrain up using the ramp, and now we're going to use the flatten tool to start sculpting ourselves a big hill here. We want lots of height variations at the top, a pretty steep slope at the side that we've already created, and then we're going to have a more gradual slope at the other end. Not worried about the terrain painting or trees or anything like that at this stage, just trying to get a natural shape that looks good and is tall enough to be visible behind the T-Rex habitat, which is of course the main thing that we need to achieve. Once we've started getting the basic shape in, we'll use the smooth tool to start getting rid of some of the more sharp edges, although we'll leave some of them in there for interest as well. And then we'll put a more gradual slope in going down the other side, and then we can start terrain painting with some of the cliff and rock textures to make it look more realistic. This is going to be the backdrop to probably the coolest habitat in the park, so whilst it's going to be far away, I still want to make sure it looks really good. So we'll do loads of terrain painting, and then we'll get the foliage brush out and start putting as many trees and rocks on here as we can. You can't get it onto the really steep parts, unfortunately, but now we've got modular building, we can fill all that in with trees as well. I'm using the kapok tree here. We're going to cover a big section of it and then group that, sink that down into the ground and start duplicating it. With that done, we'll add one final tree and we end up with this looking really good. I think that's a suitable backdrop for the habitat. Let's start building that. This is the spot set aside for the paddock. Ignore all the water, that'll all be going. This is sat just in front of that big hill that we just built. And the first thing that we're going to build is one of the big puzzles of Jurassic Park, the huge ditch in the habitat. People have tried to work out the exact geography of this habitat for years because it doesn't seem to make any sense in the film. And to be honest, I don't know why they even tried, because Steven Spielberg himself was told by one of the crew when they were filming this scene, this big ditch that the car falls down makes absolutely no sense. Aren't people going to get confused by that? And Steven Spielberg said, there's a massive T-Rex on screen, no one is going to notice. So that's straight from Spielberg himself. The layout of this habitat in the film makes no sense. So we're going to build a layout of it that does make sense, or some sort of sense at least. It's mentioned in the film that Jurassic Park has huge concrete ditches surrounding it to keep the animals contained. And the one that we see in the T-Rex habitat is the only one that you see in the film. And as has been pointed out many times, it appears to be in the exact same spot that the T-Rex was happily standing in a few minutes before. So we're going to imagine that it is a retaining wall to support this terrain here. And the rest of the habitat is at pretty much the same height level as the road. That gives us a reason to have this giant concrete drop off here. It's a piece of terrain, probably to do with drainage or something like that needs supporting with a concrete wall. So we're going to build that with these pieces here. And we're using the decals to mark out the squares that you see in the concretes when Grant and Lex are hanging from it. It looks a bit bare at the moment, but once it's surrounded by foliage and rocks, it's going to do a really good job of replicating what you see in the film. We'll fill in the rest of the terrain now so that it's up the same level as the top of the retaining wall, and then smooth out the gaps so we have this lower area here so that it makes sense. And then we'll put the fences in. So we'll get these as close to the habitat as possible, run them past the retaining wall, and then down to the next part of the habitat, which is where we're going to have the goat feeder. Such a classic moment. It's a shame we don't have a goat feeder where the goats are stationary, but we'll make do with what we've got. This is the spot just here. So we'll place one in now, on that nice and close to the road, and then we'll start tidying up and finishing off the big concrete wall. We'll use some concrete floor pieces to join it onto the road. Fill the rest of it in with foliage, and in this little bit here where the foliage brush won't do anything, we'll put our own foliage in. So loads of these palms, and then we'll get some more of the Scavola bushes in, fill the area in with those, and we can have some of them hanging over the top of the wall as well, which hides the little gap in the terrain there. Looks really good. And we can move on to the tunnel that the cars come out of before they hit the habitat. There's a whole load of arch pieces in the game. You can see them on the left here. So we're going to take 2 of them here and then just customize them to get them to the right shape. The arch piece itself is just a guide so that we can have something to build around. That won't be visible in the final build, and then we'll start copying them behind each other to start turning it into a tunnel. It's a pretty simple build this. I think there's only 3 different pieces in it at the end, but it matches what we see in the film, so I'm happy with it. Something else that just occurred to me when I was watching the film, which is testament to how good the film is that the layout of the tour in the film doesn't really make a whole lot of sense if you think about it. If you were designing a tour of a dinosaur park, the absolute last thing you would do would be to put the T-Rex second. It'd obviously be the climax, but we're going to follow the route established in the film, and to be honest I was too excited to get to the T-Rex habitat to have it any later in the tour anyway. We're almost finished with the front of the tunnel here, just getting these pieces in place and rotating them and tidying them up so we can get something that looks like how it does in the film. It's got this kind of alternating height on the roof, and once we've got it in there we can then copy this backwards to create the rest of the tunnel. Now, you can't actually create tunnels with the terrain in this game. There's no way to kind of punch through the terrain or anything like that. So we're going to make the tunnel itself out of rocks. We've already got this big rock archway in the rocks in the game. We're going to use this for the majority of it, and then we can surround it with terrain so it looks like a proper tunnel when it's done. Once we've got all of those rock pieces in, what we're going to do is go in with the terrain tool and start raising the terrain on either side of these rocks, making sure that it doesn't raise up in the middle so that the tour can still get through here. We'll do the same on the other side. Once we've got the terrain to the right height, we'll use the flatten tool to make sure it nicely melds in to the tunnel, and then we'll start putting foliage all over the terrain until we've got as much of that in as we can, and then we'll start putting in some custom foliage. We've got some ivy coming off the concrete in the tunnel, and then we've got some palms and ferns and things like that in front of it. More Scavola bushes to give us some ground cover, and then we're going to sink some trees in to join the rock arches onto the concrete so it looks like this is genuinely coming out of the middle of a hill. Finally, we'll use some of the large rocks to attach the top of the tunnel to the surrounding terrain, and we end up with this. Very happy with that. Let's finish the habitat. So there's a danger 10,000 volts sign on the fence in front of the goat feeder. Then we'll get the foliage brush as close to it as we can, and then we're going to make the dry grass and hay that you see surrounding it in the film. We're going to do that by sinking in this dry bush all around the goat feeder, and then sinking it down even more and making other patches of kind of dried grass around it so it looks natural. And then we'll use the foliage brush to surround it with jungle so we can get the exact view that they see in the film when they look out of the windows of the car. We'll take a quick look at that here, coming along nicely. And then we're going to go and finish off the retaining wall area. The join between the terrain and the concrete has the potential to look amazing, but it's not there yet. So let's fill that in with loads of different types of foliage, and then we'll use one of these big rock pieces to cover up that piece of terrain there. There we go. That looks a lot more natural like that. It's time for the single most important item in the whole of this build, the toilet. Because what every T-Rex habitat needs is a small wooden toilet just outside it. We'll surround it with foliage, and then we'll use the dirt path to create a path up to it. We'll put the T-Rex sign on that you see in the film here. I noticed in the film it's got a blue photography symbol on it, like this is a good spot to take pictures, or not. So we don't have that exact sign in the game, but we do have some signs in that style. So we'll put a blue T-Rex sign on here, put a couple of plants in, and there we go. One toilet that you should probably never ever use. Time for the final part of this build, the water pipe that Lex hides in. We don't have any water pipes in the game, but we do have this circular fountain, which will do nicely. So we're going to take this, scale this down to about the right size, recolor it to match the metal pipe in the film, and then we're going to use some of these planters to create the back of it. We've already got water coming out of it, which is very useful. So we'll just fill from the fountain at the front to the retaining wall at the back, get it in the right position, use some of these amazing puddle decals, I love these, scale these up to create a little lake at the bottom. And there we go, the T-Rex paddock is complete. Let's check it out. Here we go. What could be a better thing to do on a beautiful sunny day than to drive down and have a look at the T-Rex paddock. We've got the mountains in the background, some very nice fences, and there's even a cute little goat to look at. Only one problem, no T-Rex. Maybe we'd have more luck if we came back to the T-Rex paddock at night time. There she is. I wanted to see how close we could get to the scene in the film with these shots. And I think the answer is pretty close. This was so much fun to film. The lighting engine in this game is absolutely incredible. The way the T-Rex is highlighted by the headlamps of the car there. Let's take a look at the whole habitat. There's a retaining wall. Next, we will be building the Sauropod Swamp, the Gallimimus field. The scene where Grant and the others see a Brachiosaurus for the first time is one of the greatest scenes in movie history, in my opinion. So I really want to get this right. We see it in the film as Hammond drives them from the arrival point down to the visitor center. Although they don't see it on the tour, I'm assuming it would have been one of the last stops, which is why they didn't get to it. Although the park's map does show a few alternative routes for the tour. It's not just one loop, so it's possible that there is a tour that you can take that starts here. We don't know. But what we're going to do is get the lake in the exact shape that we see it in the film, and then build the rise behind it where the visitors see the dinosaurs. We need to get this rise in the terrain exactly right so that when you're up here, you can see both the flatter piece of grass in between this rise and the lake, That's the view that you see in the film. So we're going to do a lot of terrain work around here and a lot of smoothing to make this look nice and natural. We've got the park tour running up here as well, which we'll finesse later on. I spotted just a tiny little tree just on the edge of the lake, so we'll use a couple of these saplings to make that. We'll remove all the water lilies from the lake, and there we go. That's the basic shape of this habitat and the lake. Now we need to put the fences in. This paddock is going to be enormous, as it should be. Not only has it got the huge brachiosaurs in it, it's got the Parasaurolophus as well. So we need to make sure they've got lots of space. Also, when you see the characters looking into this habitat at any point in the film, you never see any fences or barriers, so we know they're either very well hidden or more likely it's just enormous. So we're going to surround the whole area with fences, make sure they're all completely covered up with foliage, including the row of conifers that you can see at the back of the lake. And then finally for this little area, we're going to make it match what you see in the film by adding in some really, really tall palms poking up through the conifers, which is something else you can see in this scene. There's 3 of these. We'll get them to the same place and the same height as where they are in the film using these palms, which seem to be the closest match that we have in the game to the reference image I'm looking at. And then we just need to make it so that they're not just floating in midair. So we'll just build our own trunks for them to make them much taller and attach them to the ground, just using a simple wooden pole here. We'll scale that to the right size and then just keep duplicating it until we get down to the ground. And that's this part of the habitat done, and we can introduce our first dinosaurs. Brachiosaurus first, and what a majestic animal they are. We're putting these guys in first because we're going to work on the rise in the terrain where Grant etc. first see it and get that looking exactly as it does in the movie. We'll get the park tour running through here in roughly the position I think that Hammond etc. drive up to, although they're not actually on the tour at that point. And then we'll add in trees that match the trees that we see in the film that the Brachiosaur is eating from. We'll scale up some of these eucalyptus trees and use those. We'll create another little subtle rise in the terrain here because the Brachiosaurus is kind of walking upwards, and then we'll smooth it out so it fits in nicely with the terrain around it. And then finally, we'll add in a few small plants to make it look nicer, and then we're going to add in some of the tall nuts that the Brachiosaurs eat in the game to make sure that they come up here and eat from the trees that we want them to be eating from. It's not just the Brachiosaurus in here as well. We've got the Parasaurolophus, so we're going to introduce some of those. What a name, Parasaurolophus. That's got to be one of the most satisfying names in the history of naming things, I think. I went with the Amazon River Basin skin and no pattern. This seemed to be the closest to what we see when they're off in the distance. We know that somewhere in or near this paddock is a big patch of forest that Grant and the kids see them in when they're sleeping in the tree. So we're going to fill this area with forest and some custom trees that are low enough that the Brachiosaur's heads will actually poke up above them when they're browsing. We'll put in the tree with all the big roots. We've scaled up a kapok tree as big as it goes to get those roots to be as big as they possibly can. We'll surround it with dirt and scavola bushes and then add the dinosaur eggs at the bottom. And then we'll take a look at what we've created. This is the rise just in front of the lake, and the combination of the eucalyptus trees and then the actual tall nuts trees means that the Brachiosaurs will come up here to feed. And this is the view down into the big lake. This is so close to the view in the film, minus a few humans. Really happy with this, especially when you hear the brachiosaurs honking away. And here they are at night, browsing in the forest with the eggshells at the bottom of the tree. That's the brachiosaurs, onto the Triceratops. We've made a clearing in the middle of this paddock, which we're going to surround with grass. This is the elephant grass, one of the most useful bits of foliage in the game. We're going to put this around the clearing, and then we'll make a little pattern of it, turn that into a group, and then we can just copy this all the way around this habitat, fill the whole thing with the long grass that we see our characters walk through on their way to the sick Triceratops, which is what we will be adding in a second. We'll join this on to the rest of the park, and then there's something very important that we need to build here. I was scratching my head for ages how we could build the giant pile that Ellie sinks her hands into, and after trying various pieces, I realized if we play around with the intensity, fall off, and slope of the terrain tool, we can actually create a pretty decent pile ourselves just with terrain and textures. Once we get the texture right on this and then smooth it out a bit, it is really close to the movie. I tried the root-riddled dirt first, but that didn't quite give the effects that I wanted, although it looks good around it. So we'll place some of that in this area, and if we switch to the shrub brush, there we go, that is exactly what we're looking for. We're going to make a fairly sizable paddock for our Triceratops here. This is the next stop on the tour after the T-Rex. You can just see the T-Rex paddock at the bottom there. So we run it round here, right up to the edge of the map. I added some water in off camera, and that's the habitat done. Let's check it out. All the long grass is what Grant walks through after he jumps out of his car when the Triceratops catches his attention. And here it is. Unfortunately, you can't see them breathing in and out when they're tranquilized, which is a bit of a shame, but it still looks pretty good. I'm sure Malcolm would be impressed by this. That's the Triceratops. Time for our first future attraction and our first original habitat build for one of the unseen dinosaurs on the Jurassic Park tour, the Baryonyx. This is one of my favorite dinosaurs. I think they're absolutely awesome. And it's going to be a lot of fun building a habitat for them. What we're going to do is embrace what I think is the Jurassic Park aesthetic for habitat design, which from the film seems to be, we've got a beautiful island here, let's stick up a couple of fences. So what I'm going to try and do is make it look like there's an amazing natural area in the park, and we're going to be using a modified version of this lake for that. And they've built the habitat here with viewing for the guests on a rocky outcrop overlooking a river backed with a beautiful waterfall. I want the tour vehicles to go right up to the edge of this area here. So we're going to get the terrain as close as we can to the track and then fill it in with rocks so it looks nice and natural. And then we're going to get the water right up to these rocks so the guests are super close to the Baryonyx. This is about as close as we can get with the normal water tool, but with JWE3 we have one of the best introductions into the franchise, which is the groundwater tool. Now we can have the water right up to the road. Love doing that. Let's move on to the waterfall. This is the first waterfall we've built in this game, come to think of it. The waterfall at the helipad was already there for us, so it's going to be fun exploring these tools. We'll make a big hill here, maybe not quite that big. We'll dig it down a bit, make it a more interesting shape, smooth off the edges, and then once we've got a shape we're happy with, we'll start putting the waterfall in. So we've already got water at the bottom, so we just need to add some water to the top, and waterfalls magically appear. Couldn't get any easier. Now we'll make it look more natural by covering up the terrain between the different parts of the fall with yet more lovely rocks. You could get away with this just by using the terrain paint to make the terrain that's left over a rock or a cliff texture, but I think it looks better if we use actual rocks to fill it all in. So we get one more in there, and then we'll start doing the sides of it and join those up with the terrain, get it right up to the edge of the map. And with the bottom level done, then we'll concentrate on this top level because we're going to have another waterfall up here as well, so it all flows down from here, and then we'll fill the very back of it in with foliage so you can't really see what's happening behind it. We'll use the terrain brush to easily add piles of rocks at the bottom of the waterfall to make it look more realistic, and then we'll delete the rocks that it places in front of the falls themselves, put in a bit more groundwater there. And then finally, we'll add the finishing touches to the waterfall with a few more rocks, and then we're going to get some ivy patches and place these in and amongst the rocks just to perfect the look of it. With the terrain all done and looking good, it's time to turn our attention to actually keeping a dinosaur in this lagoon. The terrain is so close to the water that if we use the default fences to create this habitat As you can see, they look really, really janky, so we're going to make our own. This is going to be the secondary fence for the habitat, i.e. one that basically keeps the guests out of the habitat in case they want to jump out of the car or something. And then below the rocks, we're going to have the primary fence, which will actually keep the Baryonyx in there. There we go. That's all of these fences in. We just need to get the concrete barriers in at the bottom as well. And then we'll just make sure that it is far enough away that the car's not going to crash into it. Okay, maybe it needs to be moved a little bit more. We got one more issue as well. The terrain is still really rough here. I've discovered something really useful to use for that, which is the flattening foundations. It hadn't really occurred to me to use these outside of building a building, but if you're struggling with the terrain, you can just put these down. They will flatten just the little bit of terrain that you put it on, and you can even delete them afterwards, and the terrain will stay flattened. With that sorted, I want a huge tree to act as a centerpiece at the end of this land here. So we're going to scale up this kapok tree, get it right in the center, and then we will decorate around it with more foliage, making sure that we don't have anything too high that's going to distract from this. It looks pretty epic at the end of the road there. Let's do some more fence work now. We're going to put some actual kind of normal in-game fences in to mark out the habitat. Add a bit of land in as well for our Baryonyx, because this is almost entirely water at the moment. And then we'll join the fences onto the big rocks right up at the map boundary here. I want to make sure the Baryonyx has as much space as possible, so we'll get it joined on here. On the other side, we'll join it here and do a little bit of decorating on the fence post as well. With Baryonyx being a pretty serious predator, I thought it'd be really cool to have a watchtower looking out over the habitat so the staff can keep an eye on her. So what I've done is taken the watchtower from the Raptor Pen that I built back in early access. So we'll get a path up to it, we'll surround it with some foliage, we'll get a damage decal at the bottom, make sure the door's in front of it, get some rust on the door, get some generic kind of dirt on all four sides of the tower's walls. If you've watched the channel for a while, you know decals are one of my absolute favourite things in Frontiers games. I like to cover everything with them, and now we've got them in Jurassic World Evolution as well. I am a very happy man. We'll get one more on here, and then a sign to indicate that this is like an emergency assembly point if something happens to go wrong in the park. And then we'll surround it with just a basic fence. This isn't like a dinosaur-proof fence, just the kind of normal fence that you'd get around any kind of building like this. And then to create the illusion, if we're looking at it from above, that this is a functioning tower with stairs going all the way up here, I realised we could just drop a window on and use the new parallax feature to make it look like there's an interior to this building without actually having to build one. And that's the habitat complete. I thought I'd show you a little overview of how Jurassic Park is progressing. Now that we've got 5 habitats in here, there's our sleepy Triceratops, here's the watchtower, and here is a Baryonyx. An amazing addition to the park, I think. I would love to have seen what Spielberg would have done with a Baryonyx habitat if they'd built the entire park. Hopefully you guys think I've done a good job with this habitat. It's the first habitat I've designed rather than just copying for a dinosaur for a very long time. I think it looks cool with the waterfall, the double row of fences and the rocks. We're going to move on to the Gallimimus now. Grant and the kids encounter them towards the end of the film. They stampede and one of them gets eaten by Rexy. We don't know if that's actually their paddock, but I'm going to assume that it is, and we're going to position it in between the T-Rex paddock and the Brachiosaur and Parasaurolophus. This also means it's fairly close to the visitor centre, which ties in with what Grant says about it being just over that ridge. And it's going to be a pretty simple build. All we need to do is get some nice hills in to match the terrain that we see in the film and cover them in grass. So I've raised up 3 different areas of terrain here, and then we're going to use the smooth tool to turn that into some subtle hills with different height variations, and then keep smoothing so that it joins on nicely with the terrain towards the bottom, which gets you down to the level of the Brachiosaur habitat. We'll also put in a little clearing here, which could be the fence that Grant and the kids climb over on their way back to the visitor centre. And once we've done that, we'll cover the whole habitat with grass, and then we'll just put in the one little tree, which is helpfully small, that you see in front of the hill, a few trees behind it, and then of course the big arrangement of dead trees that they hide behind when the T-Rex attack happens. We've actually got a big dead tree piece in the game, which is presumably inspired by that scene. I just want to make it look a little bit more interesting by mixing in some of the other dead trees as well, just to get a bit more texture into it. Fill in the forest next to the dead trees, and then we're done. It's time to get the Gallimimus in. Getting the Gallimimus to run as a herd was not easy, but eventually I found if you breed them to be skittish, it's a lot easier to get them to run around. Despite the lack of size, I think it's pretty similar to what we see in the film. That's the Gallimimus. Let's move on to something that's going to be much more complicated to build, a habitat for Herrerasaurus. Like the Baryonyx, this is a dinosaur that's seen on the park map, but the tour in the film didn't make it that far, and we're going to build it in between the Baryonyx habitat and the Stegosaurus. It's going to use a dry moat to keep the dinosaurs in and give the guests an unobstructed view of them. The first thing we're going to do is build a slice of the moat. So what we've got here is the wall that's going to keep them in, the bottom of the moat, and then the top of the moat, which will join up with the land here. And we're going to get this piece aligned to the tour track that you see above it. Then we're going to dig down into the terrain to the level of the bottom of the moat, and then just use the flatten tool to create the actual moat itself that will go all the way around here, again lining it up with the tour track. So as they look out of the cars, the guests are going to be able to see right into the habitat with no fences or anything like that obstructing their view of the Herrerasaurus. We then just need to put fences around the back and the sides of the habitat to keep the dinosaurs in, and the moat will do the rest of the work for us. We're going to have 4 Herrerasaurus in here, so we want a pretty decently sized habitat, and then we'll cross these fences over the tour track so we get the gates in. And then we can start removing some of this water. The Herrerasaurus likes a kind of wetland, swampy environment, so we're going to fill this habitat with various different wetland brushes. We want some kind of standing water and marshy areas at the front, and then we'll have a more forested area at the back to hide the fences. I'm a big fan of the wetland brushes. The way the water catches the light looks really good, and you can make a marsh in about 3 seconds. And once we've got that looking nice, we're going to get 2 carnivore feeders in right at the front to encourage the dinosaurs to spend time at the front of the habitat where they're closer to the guests. With that done, we can finish off the main feature of the habitat, the moat. Because we're going to be using this one piece to create the entire thing, we extend the sides so that when they overlap, everything looks nice and clean. And then we're going to cover the top of it in soil and some vegetation so that it joins on perfectly with the terrain next to the tour track. Might not match very well at the moment because it's just bare soil, but once we've filled it all with vegetation, it's going to look really natural. So we'll use our favourite scaevola bushes to do that, get loads of these on here, keep going until they join nicely onto the terrain, and that's our one piece completed. Now we can copy it, move it along, and line it up with the orientation of the track, and then place it down. And that's all we need to do. We'll just keep doing that down the length of this track until we get to the end. We're going to have loads of rocks at this end so that we can create an end for the moat, along with some concrete that we'll put in a second. We'll just use the same piece that we created earlier, just put that at 90 degrees, join that up to the terrain so that any dinosaurs going into the moat can't get out of it. And then we'll use fences to stop them from crossing the part of the habitat where there isn't a moat, and then we'll start putting the rocks down the far side of the moat. This looks way more realistic and much more interesting than just leaving the terrain like that. And with so many amazing rocks in this game, I'm going to use as many of them as possible. Do a little bit of terrain painting here and there to tie everything together, and then we can start putting the rest of the foliage into the habitat. We'll have one big tree in the middle of this kind of beachy area. We'll scatter some rocks around in a random fashion just for interest. And then the last thing that we'll do is one of our favourite things to do on this channel, which is to cover everything in decals. We've got a few cracks in the concrete here and there, but what we're going to use the most is some of the big dirt decals. Immediately they bring a texture and a sense of life to the concrete. I think we're ready for the Herrerasaurus. I'm not sure I've ever used Herrerasaurus in a Jurassic World Evolution game before, so I'm excited to see these. Let's head over to the habitat and check it out. Same as the Baryonyx, trying to make it feel Jurassic Parky. We know that there were big concrete ditches and moats in the park because they mentioned that in the film. So I think this does bring to mind something that could be in the park. There's the unimpeded view due to our moat, and you can see the guest view from here. And now we're going to move on to another dinosaur that was in the park but not seen on the tour, the Stegosaurus. This is probably the simplest habitat in the whole park. We've already got a really nice bit of land here with some nice rock work on the map already. Stegosaurus apparently lived in a dry environment, which in an island off the coast of Costa Rica is not going to be easy to replicate because it rains all the time there. So we're just going to thin out the forest a little bit, give it a slightly kind of drier feel without going overboard, run a simple fence down the side of the tour track, and try and make a classic looking Jurassic Park habitat. Let's take a look. One of my favourite things about the Jurassic World Evolution games is you can build something simple but beautiful in about 10 minutes. This habitat really brings to mind the film. The Stegosaurus looks amazing in here. They're such iconic animals. Like I said before, I don't think you need to do too much with their habitat. But now we have something to do that is going to take a lot of work, and that is adding an access road to the east dock so we can recreate the demise of Dennis Nedry. We're going to add in everything that you see in Nedry's final journey, starting here at the park gates. In the film, first we see him go through the park gates, and then later we see him come to a gate in what is presumably a fence for one of the paddocks, probably Dilophosaurus. He goes through it, turns to the left, drives down the road, sees a sign for the east dock, which if you look really carefully is pointing to the left, but unfortunately for him he crashes into it, so he doesn't know which way he's supposed to be going after that. We don't know which way he does go, but the next time we see him, he's driving down a road at some speed and he crashes straight through a white wooden fence and down a small drop-off with a waterfall, at the bottom of which is a road with another East Dock sign pointing straight ahead through a tunnel. That is what we are going to build, and you join me at the Dilophosaurus Habitat. So we're going to put a road through this habitat, hugging this fence to the right until we get to the end of it down near the T-Rex paddock. We'll put another gate in there, and then here is where we're going to create the white fence, the waterfall, and the whole scene for where he meets his end. My reasoning for placing that scene here is because when he encounters the Dilophosaurus, the power to the fences hasn't been out for very long. He tells the guy on the boat that he'll make it there in 12 minutes, although he doesn't sound very confident in that. He crashes on the way. He may or may not have taken the correct route after that, we're not sure. But it seems reasonable to suppose that the power has been out to the fences maybe for 20 minutes or something at that point. And with him meeting a Dilophosaurus, he must either be in the Dilophosaurus habitat or at the very least close enough to it that a Dilophosaur that escaped when the power went out could have walked there. So I think between the Dilophosaurus habitat and the T-Rex habitat is a good bet, and that's where we'll set this scene up. This is one of the modular fences in the game, and coloured white is a pretty close match for what we see in the film. As the Jeep crashes into this fence, you can see it extends to the left as we look at it here. We'll dig down so we can create the little drop-off there. We'll get this looking as close to the movie as possible in a second, but first we're going to sort out the look of the whole road, and to do that, we'll create a group of foliage that we can line the entire road with that's really going to make it feel like a proper road rather than just some terrain paint. We've got a mixture of various different plants and bushes and a tree stump on either side of the road, and we're going to turn that into a group, and then we can just copy it. We'll take it past the gate here, and then we'll copy it again and spin it around so that it follows the route that the road is going on. And we'll just keep doing that until we get back to our little scene here, and then we'll finish this off. So the first thing we need is a waterfall. I'm amazed that we could do this. I didn't think this was going to work, but I thought I'd give it a go. And if we make the smallest possible amount of water at the top there, and then delete the water back to here, flatten the bottom to get it as close to the water we just put in as possible, and then put some more water at the bottom, it actually creates a tiny little waterfall for us, which is amazing. This is one of my favourite new features in the game. The ability to just do that so easily, even in a really small space like this, is so cool. Let's start covering this terrain in rocks, using loads of different types of rock to get the exact shapes that we want, making sure that there's no visible terrain there. We'll get some rocks under the water as well, so that it continues down. I'm not sure if this would normally be a waterfall or if it was just turned into a waterfall by the storm, but it looks really nice with the rocks. And now we're going to cover the whole thing in foliage to match the look of the film, as well as using random rotation. If you keep adjusting the height of these bushes, so sometimes there's more and sometimes there's less of them sticking up through the rocks, it looks really good. And then we can move on to the last thing that we need to do before we can see this. That is to extend the hill that the T-Rex tunnel runs through out so that we can build another tunnel in it for our access road. We'll extend the terrain out, and then we're going to use one big sunken tree to make the hillside look like it's covered in lots of much smaller trees. Once we've got everything covered in there, we can actually put the tunnel into it. So we're not going to use the same tunnel as the T-Rex because it looks different in the film. It appears to be carved straight through the rock, so we'll use this rock archway, place that into the hill, draw a road in front of it, recolor the inside of it, and then put the signage in. So we've got the East Dock sign, and then there's these little white and red markers as well. You can't really make out exactly what it says on them in the film, but we're going to place down one piece of wood colored red, and then we will scale another piece on top of it just slightly smaller so that it fits inside it, which we can color white, and that gives us the two-tone effect we want. And then we'll just add on the red dots, which is all you can make out of the sign in the film. With that in there, we'll copy that to this little spot here near the Stegosaurus habitat, and then we'll draw a road from there into the Stegosaurus habitat, which would then carry on eastward to the dock. And that's everything done. Let's take a look at it. This took a ridiculously long time to film, but as silly as it is, I think it might be one of my favourite things that I've ever done. We're going to follow Nedry's exact route as far as possible, past that East Dock sign there, and into the park proper, down the road, and then into, a little too heavily, that East Dock sign. We'll pull back, and then head into the Dilophosaur habitat. You can see one there. And then we'll drive down, follow the fence, searching for the East Dock Road, through the night and the rain, through another gate, and then finally down the road towards the fence, which he sees too late. Next, we're going to be building the Aviary, Pteratops Hotel, and the riverboat ride. Before we build the Aviary, we need to get our guests there. And the way we're going to do that is with the Jungle River ride. We're on the other side of the map to the park tour here, and this is going to take people from the opposite side of the visitor center along the river. We'll be using the Cretaceous cruise to make this. And as the guests go down the river, they will go past habitats for Proceratosaurus, Metriacanthosaurus, and 2 of the Brachiosaurs, which we're going to move over from the lake. So we still have 5 in here. And at the end of the river will be the Aviary, where the guests will transfer from their kayaks to Jurassic Park style yellow rafts to explore the Aviary. So we're going to go through this part really quickly. We'll be using the Jungle River cruise based on the concept art for Jurassic Park that we already built in the first Jurassic World Evolution 3 video on the channel. We've added groundwater in around the building, and all we need to do now is add paths in over this suspended walkway, and there we go. That is the beginning of the Jungle River ride done. We'll lay the tracks in past the habitats that we've laid out roughly until we get down to the end where the Aviary is. We'll widen out the lake at the end and put another Jungle River ride down here and connect the tracks, and then we just need to run the track back to the first one, and we've got the loop that we need. We're also going to drop in a Hyperloop terminal to get our guests up here without having to put paths in. We'll give this a nice Jurassic Park style theme, and then we can move on to the boat. As you know, we can't run a Cretaceous cruise into an Aviary, we can't put paths into an Aviary. The only way to get guests in there is with a viewing dome, but these benches auto-generate people on them when you place them down. Now, you can't place these into an Aviary either, but I discovered after much experimenting making this video that you can place these benches down and then place an Aviary on top of them. That enables us to get them into the Aviary. Now all we need is a boat. Now, obviously, this boat is not functioning in terms of moving or carrying people anywhere, but we can have it sat in the middle of the water with people in it, and they will sit there and look around and gaze in wonder at the pteranodons. We just need to work out how to build a boat. I wouldn't have guessed this, but the perfect piece for building the yellow rafts from the Jurassic Park river ride is actually the Portaloo. Not sure what you guys call it in America, but that's what we call it here, a portable toilet. This has got exactly the right shape and texture to make the main body of the raft, and then we're going to use various other pieces to build the rest of it. Modeling all of this on the Jurassic Park ride at Universal Studios, which was actually designed by the team from Jurassic Park while they were making the film. I think they kind of knew the film was going to be a massive hit before they'd even finished it. As limited as the guests are in this game, it is actually really useful to have these pieces which just auto-generate guests without the guests having to sort of carve their way there. Definitely a great tool for building. Let's finish off the boat now. We're going to be using this packing crate to create the back of it. Again, it's just got the right texture for what we want here. The back of the boat is red for the main part, and then with a black part in the middle, which is, I think, supposed to sort of represent an engine, even though the ride is on a track. So we'll just keep playing around with this piece in different colors until we get something that matches the concept art. We're just going to use this piece here on both sides to finish it off. And then we will move on to putting in the black stripe, which runs around the whole boat. I tried a load of different pieces to do this, but in the end, this girder seemed to work best. We can just poke up one end of the girder just next to the join in the portaloos there. And if we colour it black, we can then just run it down the length of the boat and curve it around the front, and then the rest of the boat until we get it back to where we started. Scaling tool, so useful for things like this. The curve in the boat here isn't as long as that piece, so we'll just scale it down a bit till it fits. This part of the boat's looking pretty janky at the moment. We're going to fix that using one of the primitive shapes. We can just poke that through all the parts where there are holes and get a nice smooth curve instead of the rather janky look that we've got there. We'll run some ropes down the side of the boat, which is what the real ride has. This is where it really starts to come to life, I think. We'll have 3 of these ropes along the side, and then we're going to fix them in using an upside down light. We're just going to use the fixings for the light right here to get those ropes secured. And then we're going to take this fence piece and use this to create safety rails around the back here. We'll have 4 of these, 2 on each side. And then we can recolor the benches so they fit in seamlessly with everything else. And that is our boat, or raft I should say, completed. Looks a little bit strange sunk into the floor like that, but once we get it into the water, it's going to look much better. So let's get back to the Aviary and put the water in. Now that's done, we need to delete the Aviary. And as you can see, we can now use those guest benches here. We'll get it to the right level and we'll add our new guest raft in. Looks so much better in the water. And then we can put the Aviary back. No obstructed messages here. We'll line it up exactly with the Jungle River ride. Place some more domes in, and there we go. We've got our boat in the Aviary. We've done a lot of building so far, so let's go and add in the 3 new dinosaurs, which are going to go down the route of the river ride. A long, thin enclosure for the Proceratosaurus, because they're pretty small by dinosaur standards. We're going to have a more dry, rocky look, and obviously a much larger habitat for the Metriacanthosaurus. We'll use a mixture of sand and rocks for that. And then in the middle of it all will be a massive habitat for the 2 brachiosaurs. We're going to have jungle at the back, a clearing at the front to make sure they're visible, and then we're going to run paths through the jungle into a little clearing in the middle in case our brachiosaurs ever want to get away from the guests, although at that size I'm not sure they'll be bothered. And there we go, we've got Proceratosaurus there, nice and close to the fence. We got one of our brachiosaurs, and in the background you can see Metriacanthosaurus. I've also added free-roaming compies to all the herbivore habitats so that we can get them into the park as well. Now it's time to build the Pteratops Lodge. This is a very cool looking hotel which sits inside the aviary. You can see it in the dinner scene in Jurassic Park on the screens behind them as one of the future attractions. It's going to take some building because it's pretty complex, but it's going to look really good when it's finished. The building is circular, which means we basically just need to build one slice of it, and once we've got one part of it looking good, we can just duplicate and rotate that round to create the entire structure, and then we'll deal with the roof and the base and all the detailing later. This building plays a much bigger role in the original Jurassic Park novel than it does in the film. It's one of the many things from the novel that were cut to save costs. In the novel, the Jurassic Park aviary is complete, and the hotel is under construction, but the Sierradactylus that they have in there keep attacking the workers so they can't finish it. In the movie universe, it's the Pteranodon rather than Sierradactylus that lives here. We see those in the Lost World and Jurassic Park 3, of course, so that's what we're going to be having in here. Brilliantly, the Jurassic Park 3 Pteranodons have teeth, despite Pteranodon literally meaning wing without teeth, but I like the way they look and they match the films, so that is what we're going to be having in here. That's the first level of the structure complete. We're going to go up now and add a window in here which will be slanted backwards with a little view of a hotel room inside. The floor below it I figured would be kind of a viewing area, probably restaurants and bars and things like that as well. And then we're going to move to the back part of the structure and get that door and everything else shifted back so we can get this matching the concept art that we see in the film. Let's get a roof on it now. I'm using the Chuckum pieces because they've got this really nice curved edge. Works really well for buildings like this. And then I'm just using a simple asphalt piece to put the floor in. This will be the underside of the structure, so no one's going to be seeing this. So we want to use a fairly cheap looking piece for that. I've lined this up exactly with the side of the aviary so that when we duplicate and rotate this, it's going to fit snugly inside the aviary and follow the same curve as the back half of the last aviary dome here. And now we've got that one piece completed, we will duplicate it within the same group, spin it round in the opposite direction, place it down, get it lined up exactly where we want it in this aviary. There we go, looking nice, if a little strange at the moment. And now all we need to do is rotate it into place. Alright, we'll select the whole group now, and then we'll go to duplicate. And we're just going to start spinning this around and making sure it all lines up. And we'll keep doing that until we've got the full circle. I've moved it out of the aviary to do this just because it's easier to work with without having the aviary roof in the way. A couple more pieces to go. All done. Obviously there won't be doors in every panel once it's finished. We'll just keep the ones that we want and add loads more detailing in. We'll move it into the aviary where it should line up perfectly. Add a hatchery so we can get our Pteranodons later. But now it's sat in the aviary. It's starting to look impressive. Let's move on to the roof. There are some really interesting shapes on the roof in the concept art. It kind of spirals up in a set of white steps, and then there's a big sail behind it as well. We've got some pieces that are going to do the job for us there, and then we've got a big sail already. So we can just use that, and we just need to fill it in with some triangular pieces as well. There's also a big communications array and antennae as well, which we will add in later, and that'll be the roof completed. Then we'll build the really impressive claw-like structure at the front of the building, again mainly just using plaster panels and Chuckum poles. Again, we'll just build one section of this and then rotate it into place, and then we'll build the big spires that sit at the front of this and kind of slant in towards the structure. This is really starting to come together now, but what we need to do next is to actually give our guests a way of getting up here. So we're going to do that with a raised path that goes from the lagoon at the front of the aviary up to the entrance to the lodge. And I thought it'd be fun to kind of build this like a cage, inspired by the one that you see in Jurassic Park 3. Why we're so intent on protecting the guests at this stage when we've just left them sat in a boat right next to the Pteranodons, I have no idea, but I thought it'd look cool. And unsurprisingly, we're going to build this using the cage pieces. So we'll just build a section of it, and then we can have this coming down diagonally from the entrance to the lodge down to the floor. This won't be functional, of course. The guests will be stuck in their raft, but it's important to make everything look like it would work if they were able to move. And then we're going to add a pier in where people would get off the raft and then make their way up the ramp into the lodge. We'll delete a few pieces here to create the gap where they would get off the raft, and then it's onto the rockwork and the foliage. So I want loads of rocks in here. We're going to build a pile of it here, and then hide one of the perch points in it so the pteranodons will actually land on this rock. We're going to have loads of perch points hidden around this build to make sure they're as active as possible, and we're going to use some of the boulder paint to get even more rocks in here without having to place them all ourselves. And then we're going to use some massive rocks to join the hill next to the aviary onto the aviary, so it looks like the aviary's been built into the hill. And we need to place those really carefully so they line up exactly with the main support struts of the aviary, and that's what will make it look like it was built into the rocks rather than it was built and then we spam loads of rocks on top of it. I want a waterfall here. Can't get one in with terrain, so we're just going to have a load of upside down fountains and cover them up with rocks. Get something that looks really natural. Alright, let's finish off all the landscaping and foliage and rocks that we need inside this aviary. So we're going to use various different brushes, mainly the wetlands and the forest brush, and then one of the grassland brushes gives us some nice plants in the water. We'll place a few individual trees as well where we need them and we can't get them in with the foliage brush, making sure we don't cover up too much of the Pteratops Lodge. It's an impressive structure, so we want to be able to see it. And then we'll add one final perch point in for the pteranodons here. I wanted kind of a low rock pretty close to the water so we can see them land there. So we'll cover that up with some scaevola bushes. And there you go, that is the aviary pretty much completed. Really pleased with how that's looking. And we can move on to the last thing we're going to do today, which is create a gateway inside the aviary where the rafts would get in and out. In order to do that, we're going to use a technique which I heard about from my good buddy Leaf. If you like Planet Zoo, you'll know all about him, which is if you want to build something in the Jurassic Park style, sometimes you can find exactly what you need on the buildings that are in the game already, and because they're modular now, you can just break off the bit you need and use it yourself. So we're going to do that with the Jurassic Park themed hatchery. This big industrial looking chunk here will do nicely. We're going to place 3 of these in a curve that matches the visitor center walls, and then all we need to do is delete parts of it until we get an opening in the middle that you could put a raft through. Put some extra columns in, and that will be the entrance and exit for the boats. That is the build complete, and we can go and get our pteranodons. Here they are. Noisy little dudes, aren't they? And finally, we can see the aviary. This is where the guests transfer from their kayaks to their rafts, and this is where the raft comes in to the aviary. And here they are in the aviary. I think this is my favourite thing that I've built in this entire park. I was so pleased when I worked out a way to sort of do what we wanted to do here. And it's a lot of fun seeing this brought to life when it's always just been a photo at the back of one scene in the film. And that is Jurassic Park complete. You can see the whole park from the air here. We're going to go down and take a tour of the full park in a second, but before we do that, let's just take a quick look at the site map. This is what it looks like in-game. Lots going on here. Time for the tour. The first thing we're going to do is take a drive from our helipad to the visitors compound. Being able to drive around this park is so much fun. I really wanted it to feel like a living, breathing park. So this access road runs from the helipad down to the visitor centre. It's got an implied turn off for the east dock. And then there's another access road which runs from the visitor centre all the way down to the aviary past the Jungle River Cruise. And that means along with the park tour, you can now drive around the entire park and there'll always be a road to go on. We're just entering the visitors compound now through this access gate. This is where the access road joins on to the end of the park tour as it goes back to the visitor centre. Lots of signage so people know where to go. We will drive on down the road that goes in front of the visitor centre and do a handbrake turn, obviously. Smoothly done, and there it is. The visitor centre sits, of course, in the middle of the visitors compound. You can see the Safari Lodge, our capture team here as well, so we can keep the park running. We've also got the emergency bunker, which was helpfully already in the game for us, the maintenance shed, and one of the main reasons you need an emergency bunker, the raptors. They live in our Raptor Pen here. Poor things, it's absolutely tiny. One of the things I'm loving about Jurassic World Evolution 3 is the ability to make things like this and put actual dinosaurs in it, rather than having them all in massive fields surrounded by fences. But enough of the visitor compound, let's get into the park. The park tour begins in a garage here just behind the visitor centre. So we're going to get into one of the Ford Explorers and head out into the park. The full tour takes 25 minutes, but we are just going to be watching the highlights of it here. That big unbuildable part of the map means there's quite a journey from the visitor centre to the park gates. One of the things that does frustrate me about Jurassic World Evolution 3 and all the Jurassic World Evolution games is that you can't control the speed of the tour. You would assume that if this was a real tour, the Jeeps would have variable speeds. They would go significantly faster when they were travelling to a destination, and then probably even slower than they do here as they're going past the habitats. Plus, of course, you could stop them at certain points. near a goat maybe. But yeah, I've compressed this down to just the most exciting parts. And what could be more exciting than the entrance gates to the park? Just imagine actually going through those, knowing you're about to see dinosaurs. That would be absolutely mind-blowing. The first stop on our tour, as in the film, will be the habitat for the Dilophosaurus. Before we get there, there's a glimpse of another little road for staff which leads to the east dock, and then we're into the Dilophosaur habitat. The terrain in this habitat is raised slightly to make sure that we get a good view of the Dilophosaurs. They're impressive, but they're not the biggest of dinosaurs, so want to make sure that we can see them over the fence. I put a close-up of them in here because, like I say, they're not the biggest, but if we just look at the feeder here, you can see a couple of them there. And then it's on to the star of the show, Rexy. We're just going through the tunnel that leads to the habitat here, and thanks to the dynamic lighting that JWE3 has, it is really atmospheric in here. Pretty spooky going through here before you get to the T-Rex. And here's the habitat. This is one of my favourite parts of the park. Really pleased with how this one turned out, with the tunnel, the mountain in the background. And we get to see Rexy during the daytime today, stalking through the forest at the back of her habitat. Luckily she isn't down in the giant drop-off that makes no sense. Great to see her here. Let's get a close-up. And we can't have Rexy without a goat. There we go, let's move on to the Triceratops. There's one. I've added the wooden fence in that you briefly see when they're on their way to see the Triceratops. It's not really clear exactly whereabouts that is in the park, but there's absolutely no way a wooden fence is going to keep a Triceratops contained, so it felt kind of pointless putting it in the habitat, so I decided to run it along the beginnings and the ends, and we're just going to be in with the Triceratops. Pretty scary place to be, but hey, this isn't real, and it looks really cool when you drive straight past a Triceratops like this. We're going to move on to the Gallimimus now, and also take a look at one of the dinosaurs that features throughout the park, which is the Compsognathus. We've got these free roaming in all of the herbivore habitats, they're always just kind of bouncing around somewhere. We get a nice view of them at the beginning of the Gallimimus habitat, before we continue on and see the big fallen tree that Grant and the kids hide behind. Look at them bopping about down there, they're so cute. I really want a pet compy. Here's the fallen tree, which I spent a very long time trying to get the Gallimimus to run past. And this is what the habitat looks like from the cars. There's no fences in this one, so they can come right up to the car if they want to. I think I counted 20 Gallimimus in the film. There's 25 in here, but to be honest, we probably could have added more in. Let's leave the Gallimimus behind and go to the first future attraction on the tour, which is a habitat for Baryonyx. This is the first original habitat in the park, and it's in here because Baryonyx was named on the park map. There she is. I've tried to follow the Jurassic Park aesthetic, build it around what would be a naturally occurring waterfall, and then the Jeep tour winds around it. We've got a watchtower here as well for security purposes, which is based on the Raptor Pen. Here we go, we can see them from the cars here, and we travel round in a loop here, around a massive tree, past the Baryonyx. You can see the whole habitat here. This is another habitat that I'm really pleased with. And once you've driven past the waterfall and then the big tree, it's on to the next original habitat, which is for the Herrerasaurus. Herrerasaurus is also in here because they're named on the park map, so I built a kind of massive zoo-style habitat for them, still sticking to the Jurassic Park aesthetic, but using a big dry moat to keep the dinosaurs in, so that we can get an uninterrupted view of them from the car here. They're such cool animals. One of the oldest of the dinosaurs. And after them, we go into the habitat of one of the most famous dinosaurs, which isn't in the film, but is one of the embryos that Dennis Nedry steals, the Stegosaurus. Who doesn't love Stegosaurus? Such an amazing animal. Got a lot of comments about the skin that I chose for these guys because I didn't go with the Lost World skin, but I just think it's really low res, looks really poor. So I went with Frontier skin, with the colours matched as closely as possible to how they appear in the Lost World. I checked again after all the comments, and I'm going to stick to my guns. I much prefer this texture, so that's the one that's in there. When you download this on the workshop, you can of course just remove the Stegosaurs and replace them with some with the Lost World skin if you like. I'm going to put the download code up on screen at the end of the video so you can jump in and explore Jurassic Park yourself. And we're entering the final habitats in the tour part of the park, the Brachiosaur and Parasaurolophus Lagoon, one of my favourite places in the park. So peaceful in here. and the brachiosaurs are just absolutely majestic. It would be amazing to drive through here and see this, as long as one of them didn't stand on the car you were in. I'd love to know what your favourite build is in Jurassic Park, so let me know in the comments. This is probably the one paddock in the film that you could recreate perfectly in the last 2 games as well. All you need to do is get the shape of the lake right, get the hills right, get the trees right, and then add your dinosaurs, and it always looks good. No building or anything like that in this one, it's all just landscaping, but it's just so close to the film, I absolutely love it. And that's the end of the park tour, but not the end of Jurassic Park. We're going to return to the visitor centre to see the other side of the park with the Jungle River Cruise, the Aviary, and 4 more dinosaurs. Back in the visitors compound, this is the Safari Lodge based on concept art for the film, and this is the entrance to the second part of the park and the Jungle River Cruise. Here's the entrance to it. This is where our guests would begin their journey down the river through the park. No swimming, please. Starts on a kayak, because that's the only option we've got in the game. We'd love that to be a big yellow Jurassic Park style raft, but that's the only option we've got at the moment. But regardless of what boat you're in, once you get out onto this river, it is so serene. I really like this part. The first dinosaur that we see on this part of the trip is the Proceratosaurus. We've got a couple of those in here, in a habitat designed to keep them as close to the fences as possible so that we can see them. And then you can get a glimpse here of the latest addition to this river, which is a bridge that I just built a couple of days ago. And I gotta say, despite the lack of vehicle choice, this is such a good addition to the game. Being able to watch your guests just floating down this river is so cool. This is a functioning bridge, so you can drive a Ranger Jeep over here to get down to the Aviary. And in the background you can see the next dinosaur on the river cruise, some more Brachiosaurus. There's 3 in the Brachiosaurus Lagoon, and then 2 of them here. And on the other side of the river is Metriacanthosaurus, and then at the end of the river is the Aviary. This was the most extensive build in the park, getting this to work, or to look like it works, getting the Pteratops Lodge inside it, and most importantly getting a boat in here with guests actually sat in it. It's definitely the most difficult part of the entire park to build, but I think it was well worth the time spent. And that is where we are going to end the tour, here in the Pteratops Lodge at the top of the Aviary with the pteranodons flying around. If you want to check out Jurassic Park yourself, then the workshop code is on screen now. I'll be back soon with some more Jurassic World Evolution 3. Until then, thanks for watching.